Hey Canada. Hey Danny, how are you? Oh, that's a really famous town. You should go to the hot springs. There was a huge struggle there between indigenous Americans and the US Army. South Carolina, hope you're okay in the fires. Philadelphia. Yeah, here's Matthew saying we love you, Canada, just outside of Chicago. Is it cold? It's finally warmed up a little bit here in New England. All right, I'm going to jump in right into stuff today because I've been on the road and I'm going back on the road on Thursday. And what that means is that when I am in at home, all the meetings pile up, and I just had a meeting that was supposed to go till 5, got ended early, so I had time to run on here because I want to make sure I say some things this week, and I'm going to try, as I say, to do these more often. And yes, I know Facebook is not going to continue to keep videos. We're moving them over to YouTube, and I'm going to be going live from YouTube, and squad or casting on here in Facebook going forward. But I want to start with something that's really important. So what happened on February 28th in the Oval Office was really important for all the reasons that I've written about, that it was the turn away of the United States from the post-World War II order in which we supported democracies around the world and supported the UN and supported NATO and so on. But that's not actually what I want to talk about. I wrote a letter about it that day. Feel free to go read it. It's February 28th. But what I wanted to talk about was something else. What happened in that meeting, again, as we know now, looking back, what was happening was that Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance were setting up Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky so that they would have an excuse for ceasing for the U.S. to support Ukraine, even though the Congress voted for it to do so, and it is illegal and unconstitutional for them to stop that. But they were trying to set him up. It was very clearly set up. President Vance isn't normally at a meeting like that. That's a presidential meeting. There wouldn't normally be a vice president there. And as I wrote about, they gave credentials to Russian state media, did not give it to Reuters or to the Associated Press for the U.S. It was clearly a setup. But something happened there. And what happened was that when Zelensky started to hint that Trump was handing the U.S. over to Russia when he repeatedly said, "You will feel pressured," which is exactly what happened to Ukraine under Russia. Trump lost it. I mean, you can go look at this tape. It's available video. It's available on YouTube. And you can see all of a sudden Trump cracks and he just pitches a conniption fit. And that really matters because watching that, you will see he loses control. He loses control of the situation, and it turns out to be a complete disaster when all of a sudden he starts talking about Hunter Biden's laptop and Hillary Clinton and Adam Schiff. And I mean, it just becomes a real nightmare. And again, Trump is not in good mental shape. So the reason I say that is because it was clear to anybody watching it, and you can go watch it yourself. It was clear to anybody watching it that it was a complete public relations nightmare for the White House. Aside from everything else, it was terrible. Now, since then, and this is what I wanted to highlight today, social media especially has been flooded with all sorts of excuses for what happened. And you've been sending them to me. Things like saying that Zelensky called Vance an epithet, and so Vance got mad, or saying that Zelensky has stolen billions of dollars in aid, even though Trump's own special envoy to Russia and Ukraine says, no, we know where all the money has gone, and it's mostly been material anyway. We've seen all this stuff, including today I've started to see things circulating about former President Bill Clinton talking positively about Putin in the immediate aftermath of the collapse of the Berlin Wall, the end of the Soviet Union. And people are saying, well, how come it was okay for a Democrat to do it, but not for a Republican to do it? And I mean, just on that front, that was 35 years ago. The world has changed, and Putin has changed, and many things have changed in 35 years. But the reason I wanted to call that out is because people keep writing to me and saying, is this true? Is this true? And you need to internalize the answer is no. What you are seeing and what you are experiencing is classic disinformation. That is, the facts are easily obtainable. This is why I put citations down. What happened was that in 1994, Ukraine had about a third of the world's nuclear weapons because of the collapse of the Soviet Union. And the United Kingdom, the United States, and Russia all guaranteed that if Ukraine gave up those nuclear weapons, those three countries would guarantee Ukraine's sovereignty at the borders where they were. Now, I'm not going to give you the entire history of all the countries involved, but in 2014, Russia invaded Ukraine and took Crimea, which is part of Ukraine. And then in 2022, it invaded again to take at least 4 eastern oblasts, that is, regions of Ukraine. And they have been bombing civilian areas and torturing people and killing civilians and, and kidnapping children. I mean, this is not a gray area at all. But what you are seeing is the flooding of our social media by Russians or Russian adjacent voices that are trying to convince you that what you are seeing is not real. And mind you, what I am saying, you can check this. You do not have to take my word for it. You can check what happened. You can check it even in places like Wikipedia, which certainly has weaknesses, but is a pretty good summary of what we understand. So you can check these things. But when people send that stuff to you and circulate that stuff to you, they are trying to weaken you and they are trying to weaken the United States of America. Because instead of you being out there saying, what are you talking about? Russia's kidnapping children and murdering, destroying Bucha and destroying, the invading these borders that it promised to hold steady. Instead of doing that, you're now saying, wait a minute, let me figure out if this is true so I can answer the people saying this. This is classic disinformation. It sends you into a no-win situation where you're like, but wait, let me explain it to you. Let me explain. You can't explain it to those people. That's not the point. The point is to waste your time. Now let me move this in so you stop doing you stop feeling certain and you stop doing the things that would stop this. So let me put it in personal terms. You all know people who do this, who behave this way. They are dominating you through the conversation. So, if you go to your roommate and you say, I'm sorry, I'm tired, I'm not going to come up with a good example, but they come back and say, well, what about this? And you end up, if you say, did you take my mail? And they say, well, yes, I did. But what about yesterday when you didn't do the dishes? And then all of a sudden you're arguing about the dishes instead of the original problem. This is what you are seeing. Stop looking at these things and saying, wow, is this true? I didn't know this. It's not true. This is why they are doing it. And you see it also with the Department of Government Efficiency, where they were circulating a whole bunch of things saying, well, this is what Clinton and Al Gore did in the 1990s. First of all, if you have to go back into the 1990s to justify yourself, you're in trouble. But second of all, it's simply not true. Clinton and Gore put in place a gradual reduction in force that was passed in a law by Congress. That's completely different than Elon Musk, apparently, and his team coming in and just taking a sledgehammer to our government. So when you see those arguments and you're trying to be fair-minded and you're trying to say, well, is this true or is this not true? They are taking advantage of your good nature and your willingness to entertain alternative viewpoints in order to weaken you and to weaken the idea of American democracy. Now, that's not to say that you have to believe everything that somebody like me tells you. I make mistakes, and anybody who is in the field of delivering knowledge makes mistakes, and they acknowledge that they make mistakes and they correct them. That's how the world works. If people are saying to you, well, you're just missing out on the fact that one I heard the other day was that it was really Zelensky who started the war. He invaded his own country. That's not how that works. Now, you can have a much longer discussion about geopolitics and, whether there were moves that were made in the 1990s that weren't fabulous or whether there are moves being made now that aren't fabulous. That's perfectly legitimate discussion, but what is at stake is American democracy and the world order. That's not, it's fine to have that discussion, but this is not what's going on here in this picture. And that I really, really wanted to say. Somebody has just said, I spin the facts as much as the other side. You know, in all the years I've been doing this, nobody has ever come at me and said, here are the facts where you are wrong. They call me stupid. They say that I'm doing things like spinning, all those things. When you can come to me with facts, and by the way, I do get those in my email from people who are concerned and they're like, I think you missed something. And the truth is, I learn from them and I say so. And if I made a mistake, I correct it. So again, this is an attempt to get rid of a reality-based community. You want to argue with me? You come to me with actual facts of things that happened. Not what Tucker Carlson told you and not what, Donald Trump is saying. We need actual facts in order to reestablish democracy. All right, so let me tell you, and let me answer the questions about some of the things that you asked. People asked, why is Trump putting on tariffs right now? Because it makes no freaking sense. He inherited an incredibly strong economy. All he had to do was go drink Diet Cokes and play golf and keep things on a relatively even keel, and he has chosen not to do that. It is he's crashing the stock market, and it certainly looks as if our economic growth is going to go from about plus 2.9, which is what it was at the end of, it's projected to be at the end of January. It is now negative 2.8. He's actually contracting the economy, which means people are going to lose jobs. Why would one do that? Well, I don't know. I'm not in Trump's head, but let me tell you what the options are. One is that, and this is what I thought I was going to see, and right now, to my knowledge, I am not seeing it, but again, we certainly don't have all the information, and that is that I expected that this was going to be about kickbacks. He would say to he would say, I'm going to put tariffs on everything coming in from Canada and from Mexico. And that would make the major US automakers, for example, and the major US producers go to him and say, I really need an exception for my stuff. And, maybe it would be a really good thing if I held my next convention at your hotel, and let's just put 30 million toward that, and that would be really helpful then if we didn't have the tariffs. I thought we were going to see kickbacks. I may or may not have been wrong on that. But the other piece of this is that he is trying to justify these extraordinary extensions of the 2017 tax cuts. And he is talking about an extension for 10 years. They're supposed to expire in 2025. And these are the tax cuts that give such benefits to the wealthy and to businesses. The Republican senators are talking about making those permanent. Now, just again, to reiterate, the reason we have a budget deficit is not because of all the money we're spending on civil servants whose numbers have not gone up in 50 years. That is, they went up briefly in 1990, and that was the peak, and now they're about where they were 50 years ago, although the country has grown by 2/3. What has increased is government contractors. Those have gone up by 5%. By 5 times. Not by 5%, but by 5 times. Nobody is talking about cutting those. So what has caused the increase is not the government workers. What has caused the increase are the tax cuts under George W. Bush. Remember that under Clinton, who came before him, the budget was actually running a surplus. George W. Bush cut taxes and began the deficit, ran 2 unfunded wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and then now we got the Trump tax cuts of 2017. When he was in office in his first term, Trump increased the deficit by 25%, by about a quarter of the entire debt we had before COVID. Okay, so the thing about the tariffs is that Trump wants to extend those tax cuts, but the Congressional Budget Office, a nonpartisan people who rank how much a law is going to cost, that's the CBO, if you've ever seen that, they say those tax cuts are going to increase the U.S. debt by I think it's $6 trillion over 10 years. So Trump has been saying that we can do that because tariffs are going to bring in so much money. And he keeps trying to tell people that tariffs bring in money from other countries. They don't. They bring in money from consumers at home. And because they are regressive, that is, it's according to how much you buy. But, somebody who makes a gazillion dollars isn't going to buy any more soup than somebody who makes 15,000 a year. The taxes tend to fall regressively, they tend to fall on ordinary people. So he might be putting these tariffs on simply to excuse his taxes. Or finally, one of the things that we're important to remember in this moment is that there's a lot of people running around in the government, at the head of the government right now, who don't have the same interests. So sometimes they coincide and sometimes they don't coincide. And right now, it certainly appears as if Trump has handed the presidency over to Elon Musk, rather as if Musk is the prime minister and Trump is the president, if you will, is overseeing things. And that's something that tech entrepreneur Curtis Yarvin called for in one of his manifestos about what he would like a technology-oriented government to do. That's a rabbit hole I'm not going to go into. I have written about Curtis Yarvin. You people ask me about that. I've written about him on at least 2 occasions. And you can search those things on Facebook or on Substack. Just search for the keyword. Facebook's search engine is better than Substack's in my experience. All right. So the other piece of this, and what the reason I just said there's different things going on, Elon Musk has spoken frequently and very complimentarily of the person who's in charge of Argentina right now, Milei. His name is Javier Milei. And he took Argentina's economy, which was in real bad shape, and he cut it dramatically. He's the first guy with a chainsaw. And he got all the attention for doing the chainsaw. And what he did was he simply slashed everything. And now they're trying to rebuild the economy. But the trick to that is if you slash everything, if you get rid of all the government services, what happens is that you can sell off all those assets of the government. And watch for the word asset. Assets of the government, because this is language that's it's been for a while, to come out of the Trump White House. And the United States government has a lot of assets. And I'm not talking about what I consider assets, our people, our health, our natural resources, all that. I'm talking about what they look at on a ledger book. And that is things that are valuable. And some of those things are real estate, for example. And you've certainly seen how the Department of Government Efficiency team has gotten into the General Services Administration and is selling off real estate. But it's also our natural resources. And this is something that I'm watching very closely because 3 days ago, I think it was, I've lost track of the days as usual, Trump has called for timber harvesting in our national forests. And I'm very concerned about the idea of selling off our natural resources to private investors, especially in the American West. So it may simply be that the idea is to crash the economy so that everything becomes very cheap, and then people with money can pick it up cheaply. And that is another possible answer. Or maybe, I don't have any insight here as to what the way he's thinking. Maybe he just likes the word tariff. Who knows? But it makes truly zero economic sense to do what he's doing. And I'm not against tariffs in certain ways, but this is simply a way to destroy the U.S. economy. And incidentally, that idea of privatizing public goods is exactly what Viktor Orban is doing in Hungary, but also what Vladimir Putin did in Russia when he began to rise to power. All right. So another couple of questions here, and that is, you asked about Social Security and what's happening with Social Security and what is going to be done with Social Security. And I think it is clear that what we're going to see with Social Security and Medicaid is that they are probably not going to explicitly cut it, because that would be political suicide. What they are going to do is they're going to make it extraordinarily difficult to get those services. So the cuts to all the Social Security offices, when in fact most elderly people right now go to those offices to get things straightened out, the cuts to all those offices, and I think you're going to see the same thing with Medicaid and Medicare, but certainly with Medicaid, they're just going to make it too difficult to apply. Now, if you remember, that's something that happened in Florida for unemployment insurance before the pandemic, when basically it was almost impossible to get those benefits. So they could say, well, we just don't have anybody getting those benefits. We don't have that kind of problem in Florida. In fact, the issue was that people simply couldn't get them. So my guess is that's what it's going to look like. But one of the things I also want to emphasize is you are seeing, once again, the gaslighting of Republicans who are saying, it's a lie that we're coming for Medicaid. We never mentioned that in the budget resolution. But a way to think about what they did do, and similarly to the SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Programs, which used to be known as food stamps, which are in the Agriculture Department. One of the things that they said we never mentioned that. Well, what they did is they told the people the committees that oversee those programs, that they had to cut a certain amount, and it's not possible to cut that amount without cutting SNAP and Medicaid. So the way to think about this, I was thinking about this the other day, is if you were working in a job and you had 4 people under you who each made, let's say, $50,000 a year, so your total outlay for your department is $200,000, and your boss came to you and said, I don't care how you do it, but you need to cut $150,000. And then went out to the cameras or went to your employees or the people working under you and said, I never mentioned you. I never mentioned she had to cut you. So that's exactly what they're doing. They're saying, we're taking all this money away from you. We don't care how you do it, but the only way to do it is to go after Medicaid and SNAP benefits. So I'm going somewhere with this, and I have a 5 o'clock meeting, so I'm rushing a little bit. So one of the other things here is, I want to emphasize that one of the things that Trump is doing with his welcoming, for example, of the Tate brothers who were under investigation in Romania and in the United Kingdom for sex trafficking and rape and something else, money laundering, maybe, I don't remember. Don't quote me on that one. The first 2 are right. Is both the emphasis on that kind of violence, that kind of dominant violence that most of us find abhorrent, and that is designed both to sort of say we can do this, we're dominant, but it's also designed to make us afraid. And one of the things, and just kind of to break our hearts, and one of the things that they are talking about today, they're making noises about, is a pardon for Derek Chauvin, I was reading French, who is the man who knelt on George Floyd's neck until he died. And that's just horrific. No matter how you slice it, the idea that and it's all on video. This is an attempt both to horrify us, to make us afraid, and to change our reality. That video exists. I don't recommend that you watch it, but you could watch it. I did before I wrote about him. And it is truly, truly horrific. The idea that our leaders would be saying to us, these are the people we want to reinstate in our society, with the argument that the Justice Department was unfair, is something that is designed to turn our stomachs and to make us not care anymore. So this is where I'm going with this. People have asked, who's pushing back and what can you do? And one of the reasons that I mentioned Social Security there is because what you are not seeing as much in the newspapers and in the media, including from me, because I'm trying to keep a record of what Trump is doing, there is a very powerful pushback, first of all, from Democratic attorneys general, who did start planning in February of 2024 for what would happen if Trump won the election. It says I'm still running, even though I can't see anything anymore. And so they've been very active. If you notice, every time Trump does something, they are pushing back literally within hours. They've already written these lawsuits against what they thought he would be doing either himself or through Project 2025. So they're being very active. You're also not seeing some of the stuff going on behind the scenes, and I'm not seeing all of it either, but I know there is a lot of stuff going on back there. People putting pressure on places that could make a difference. And so the reason that I mention that is because the biggest pushback that you're seeing and the most important one is us. And, really the Republicans in the Senate have failed us. Certainly the Republicans in the House of Representatives has failed us. The courts are doing all they can, but there's a number of people in the courts who are not going to be able to hold the line. The president has failed us. Some people in the media have failed us. But you know who has not failed us? Is us. And one of the things that is really important is to continue to demonstrate that what's happening in this administration does not have the support of the American people. And even people who voted for the Republicans now, the number of people who wanted Project 2025, who thought it was a good idea, 4%. I mean, we're not talking that this is 51-49. 4% of Americans wanted that. So that continuing pressure on not just Democrats, but also on Republicans at every level, even when they write you back those annoying letters saying, well, I believe in this stuff, they are listening to you and they are recognizing they're in trouble. How do I know that? Because the Republican National Committee has just urged people, maybe that's not, the Republicans, I'm sorry, I'm not grabbing the acronym right now, have told congressional members of Congress to stop holding town halls, because what they're doing is they're creating viral moments that everybody's like, wow, this is amazing. In these red districts, people are screaming at their members of Congress. So keep that pressure up, keep writing to people. And I would also urge you to ask your Democratic representatives or people who lost in the last election to hold the town halls that the Republicans aren't. That they would be a very good group of people to rally around to say, what would you be doing here? What should we be doing? That's a really good place to be. So I would urge you to do that, but I'm going to I've got to go in 2 minutes. I've got a hard out here. So, but I'm gonna suggest something else. And that's that, I'm always talking about making sure your voices are heard on social media and all the different places they are. But this thing about Derek Chauvin really upset me, because one of my best students ever, one of my favorite students, is a law enforcement officer. And this is not him at all. And he's great. And those of you who are law enforcement officers or law enforcement adjacent, whether it's with the military or the police or the National Guard or any of the many places where we have law enforcement officers, the people who are upholding the law, those are people to honor and to call out and to make sure that they understand that we're relying on them. And, I'm sitting here, I'm thinking of that particular student, but now I'm also thinking of all my other students who are in the military or in the National Guard, or people like Mike Fanone, who was a Capitol Police officer who voted for Trump, has said he voted for Trump and now is defending democracy. That's the kind of voice that we need to bring out into the open, so that we don't think that all law enforcement officers are like Chauvin, because they're not. And if you know those people, that's my task item, is to call them out and to uphold them in this moment going forward, as you call on all your reserves to make sure people are protecting American democracy. Okay. I'm gonna run here, and I will try to do these more often. But like I say, I got a heart out, so I got to run. Thank you for being here. I'm sorry that was sudden notice, and I hope that was useful. And I will see you again real soon. Thanks for being here.